This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome to the latest Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo. I'm Joe Rimmer and I'm joined today by Tom Cavilla and Keifer MacDonald to talk all things Reds. Tom, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. And Keifer, seeing you again. How are you?
Yeah, a bit of a regular now, aren't I? Which is always a good time considering our work here. But yeah, a lot of racking up those podcast appearances in recent weeks.
Yeah, if we're a three-man midfield, we're like, I suppose, what does that make me? I was going to say the Fabinho and the Henderson, but that would mean we're leaving. But we're the regulars, aren't we? And then Tom is rotation.
You can be Kante and I'll be Drinkwater. You can just be a little guy.
What does that make Tom?
Tom can be the Riyad Mahrez, just drop him in for the big occasions.
Oh, nice. Why have you gone for Leicester 2016?
Yeah.
Surprise package. Everyone.
Yeah. Seems quite left field. Well, Liverpool were action yesterday. They drew 4-4, another 4 goals scored for Liverpool, but another 4 conceded against Greuther Furth in Germany. It was the last game of their pre-season training camp in Germany before they fly out to Singapore to play Leicester and Bayern Munich. Keifer, we'll start with you. There's just plenty to talk about from the game. We'll start, I think, with Luis Diaz, who was probably the one forward who didn't impress in the previous game against Karlsruhe, but then went and scored a really lovely goal and looked sort of on his game in the first half there yesterday. Impressed by him, and plenty to be excited about in those 4 forwards, isn't there, going into the season?
Yeah, absolutely. We've touched on it a number of times this summer, that how big a season it is for so many of them. Obviously, you've got Diaz, who is looking for his first full campaign at Liverpool. Obviously, joined halfway through last year, and then obviously the season just gone. He's spent 7 months on the sidelines, and even though he did come back for the last 10 or so games, I think everyone knew that it was more of a fitness thing and more of a tick boxing exercise ahead of pre-season and just getting some minutes in the tank. And to be fair, as you say, he didn't score he was the only forward not to score last week, wasn't he? But he looked really sharp yesterday, and it was a really well taken goal. It was kind of the explosive Diaz that we saw when he first arrived at Anfield, and he was so such an important cog in that kind of quadruple chase towards the end of the season. I thought it was quite telling. I actually wrote something about it yesterday, a celebration, and kind of it looked like he let off quite a lot of frustration, and he kind of screamed and he punched the air, which there's not too much to be taken from that. But I thought if you are maybe getting the microscope out, it was maybe the frustrations that he's endured over the since last October, and maybe now looking to kind of really kickstart and cement that left-sided position on Liverpool's forward three. He'll be certainly up against Darwin Núñez and maybe Diogo Jota. It obviously depends what happens with Cody Gakpo, but in terms of a second run out of pre-season and looking ahead of that Chelsea game now in 2.5 weeks, I thought it was a really bright showing from Diaz.
Tom, there was obviously that little bit of tentative talk from Saudi Arabia that of interest in Luis Diaz. And last season, obviously, with the injury and just a poor season all round for Liverpool, there were 1 or 2 Liverpool fans that were almost thinking that Liverpool should sell him. Do you think people have forgotten just how good he is on his day? And do you think it'll be almost a breakout campaign for him in the season to come?
Yeah, I think obviously with him being out injured for so long, that's not really helped. I think similar sort of thing happened with Jota as well, where he missed a large chunk of last season, and people were sort of suggesting, they'd be happy to cash in on him this summer if the right offer came in. And I think when that sort of thing happens, when you don't see that player for a long time, you probably forget how good they are. I think a lot of people, not Liverpool fans maybe, but other fans did the same sort of thing with Van Dijk, being out for that long period of time. And then since he's come back, people, a lot of questions about him. I think when he first came back to the team, people were sort of saying, should he even be starting in Liverpool's team now he's coming back from this injury? And I don't know, it's a bit of a funny one with injuries. People seem to be like that about players, even though it's not their fault they're injured, and it's not like you become a bad player instantly just because of an injury. So I think he had a really good first season at Liverpool, and hopefully we'll see the best of him this year. I imagine he would be starting for Liverpool. I would like to see him play, most games, really, you'd imagine. And I think it's a big season coming up for him. He's going to have a big part to play.
Keifer, I mentioned 4 front players, but it's slightly unfair. Maybe I should say 5, because Diogo Jota played and missed a bit of a sitter, but did look sharp. But the other person in the front three, Doak, I just love watching him play football. He's so direct, positive. He's a bit of a throwback in the way that he plays. I mean, a bit of talk about loans perhaps early this summer, but do you think it's one where he stays put and gets a bit of football now? I mean, he's certainly doing his best to force his way in, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you say, Joe, he's such a throwback. He always reminds me of, obviously before my time, but when you see old clips of kind of Wayne Rooney at Everton, and he's a kid in a man.
Your time, Wayne Rooney at Everton. 2003,
we're talking now. But yeah, when you see clips of him, and he's a kid in a man's body, isn't he? And he's just a bulldog. Really, he's fearless, and that's kind of the way I look at Doak. He's I tweeted something yesterday and said he plays every game, whether it be the under-18s, the 21s, the 19s in Europe, or the first team. Every game is played with the same level of confidence and directness. And sometimes when these young lads come up to the first team, not that there's anything wrong with it, but sometimes the first pass is backwards, and then it's looking to build on that, and maybe element of walking before you can run, and that's absolutely fine, and that's served players well in the past. But Doak just comes, and he's only 17, and he just in the nicest possible way, he shows nobody any respect, does he? I mean, there was that various clips have been taken on fullbacks, probably double his age. But then there was a really good clip last week in the Karlsruhe friendly where the ball was kind of falling between him and Matip, and he basically just ushered Matip out of the way and was like, this is my area, this is my ball, that I'm going to do what I want. But I certainly think it's an interesting dilemma for Liverpool, because I think if you look at him and Bobby Clark, I know Bobby Clark's slightly older, but it feels like he's slightly further. He's further down the line in his development, and if you're looking at the two of them, you obviously say a loan would be better for Clark, but you look with Liverpool now in the Europa League, and certainly those games at Anfield where you got to remember Liverpool are first seed as well, so hopefully they'll get a favourable group in those games at Anfield where you are going to get a lot of the ball, and it's going to be a rotated side. You think they'll be perfect for him, and there's going to be 3 of those at home before Christmas, and then if they do get into the last 16 or the last 32, there'll be another couple of games, and then if you tie that in with the League Cup and then the FA Cup after Christmas, he's looking at 10 or 12 senior games, and that wouldn't be a bad thing if he finishes a season with 15 games for the Liverpool first team. He's training with Diaz and Salah and Gakpo and all these fantastic forwards every day. It's certainly difficult. I always remember kind of the Harvey Elliott conundrum a few years ago, and it was very similar in terms of does he benefit staying with the first team for a year and kind of having that first-hand education, or does he go and almost earn his badges in the Championship? But I think it will depend what offers come in, and what kind of team does come in for Liverpool. I think a lot of people forget, but these youngsters, they'll be living in digs at the time. So is it a local team? Is it a Blackburn? Is it a Preston? Is it a Burnley or someone who come in for them? I think Elliott, when he went to Blackburn, went on deadline day or very close to deadline day. So that just shows how quickly the picture can change. But you look at teams like Preston. Liverpool do have a good relationship with them. Obviously, Sepp van den Berg did 18 months there. Calvin Ramsey's gone there. Leighton Stewart's just signed there on a permanent, and obviously Ryan Lowe used to play for Liverpool. So you look at all those factors and you think, whatever does happen, there is, there's positives and negatives to both. I think, like I say, a year away we're doing well, but I don't think anyone will be complaining if they're watching Ben Doak line up in the Europa League or the League Cup. It just kind of shows the kind of strength that Liverpool can now boast in attack. If you think of years gone by when it was, certainly horses for courses in midfield, but in attack every week it was, Firmino, Mane and Salah. But now Liverpool have got 5 forwards, and I bet if you said to us now, Joe, name your first choice front 3, I bet we'd all have different answers and combinations. So that just kind of shows the level that Liverpool are at the moment. That's it.
I mean, with Ben Doak, I do think it's that dilemma for Liverpool, whether he goes out and plays almost every game for a Championship club, like Harvey Elliott did a couple of years back, and that seems to serve him quite well. But I'd be tempted to keep him, like you say. I think play him in those Europa League games, play him in the League Cup early rounds, at least play him in the FA Cup early rounds, and get him on for 20 minutes here and there, half an hour here and there, in home games. And I just think there's no better place for him to grow than alongside 4 absolutely world-class attacking players at Liverpool. And I don't want to see a player like that. They need to keep their youth, don't they, in terms of the way that, like you say, he's fearless and he doesn't seem to worry about, where his first pass goes. He picks the ball up. He's only got one thing in mind, and that's to cause havoc at the end of the pitch. So I really like the way he plays. I hope Liverpool can harness that a little bit this season, and I'd like to see him stick around. Tom, where do you stand on it? Is I guess loans are quite difficult to organise and to make work, but Would you loan him? Would you keep him? Would you play him? What would you do, Tom?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think, you're talking about Elliott then. I think a lot of people forget how young he actually was when he went on loan to Blackburn. I think he was only 16 at the time.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, it was 17 at the oldest, but I'm pretty sure he was 16 at the time.
Yeah.
So if Liverpool, Ben Doak still very young as well. So I just think if you're sending him sort of like the Championship, there is that risk. You're coming up against very physical players in that league. Same, obviously, further down you go, League One, League Two. He's not going to be going that low in the pyramid, but even in the Championship, you get that as well. That very physical league, very demanding. Probably would struggle a little bit with that. There's a chance you're going to get a lot of tackles going in as well. So there's always that risk of an injury as well. But he seems like the sort of player that would take that in his stride, that kind of challenge to go out on loan. And if Harvey Elliott was able to do it at that age, you'd think he may be able to as well. I think you don't really get, someone like that who can go out so young. It's only a sort of certain type of player that has to be, of a particular level, too good for academy. I don't think there's many players you get that are like that. Obviously, Harvey Elliott was one of them. Curtis Jones was probably another one where, Liverpool quickly realised he was too good to be playing in the younger categories. He obviously just came up to the first team and didn't need the loan. But I guess it's different for every player, really. It depends how far along Liverpool think they are in terms of development. I think the ones that tend to go on loan are the ones Liverpool think, probably need that experience of, being in that difficult environment that they're going to be coming up against in the Premier League. So I would probably keep him for this season, only because I think Liverpool may need him at certain points. He's a useful player to have in the cup games. Liverpool lost a lot of players that were useful for that, like Origi, Minamino, Chamberlain, Milner. Those kind of players you can just throw into those kind of games. So, although he's young, I think he would be fine in Carabao Cup, FA Cup, early round games, and maybe even plays later on in those competitions if Liverpool were to get there.
Yeah, I suppose Kay Gordon did that, didn't he, a couple of years
Yeah.
back when he played in the semi-final, of course, against Arsenal. We'll talk midfield in a second, the game yesterday, but before we move on, some breaking news. David Ornstein reporting Liverpool's opening bid of 37 million for Romeo Lavia has been rejected. I think it works now to talk about that now, because I was going to talk about Trent as the number 6, Gakpo in midfield. But before we do so, I mean, Southampton seem to be holding out for 50 million. Obviously, we know Southampton from experience don't tend to compromise on figures. But, Liverpool must be convinced, mustn't they, Keifer, that this guy is the right one. I mean, I can't say that I watched a great deal of Lavia last season. Obviously, the highlight we did see was him setting up Diogo Jota for the easiest tap-in you'll ever see on the final day of the season. But, Liverpool will have done their homework. They must be pretty confident if they're bidding upwards of 37 million for somebody. And if that's an opening offer, you expect them to go higher. Keifer, they must be pretty confident, aren't they, that this guy is the man to take their midfield forward. Do you still think they'll need experience in there, depending on what happens with Fabinho?
Yeah, if we're assuming that Fabinho's deal gets signed and kind of concluded, in the weeks, days, and whatever ahead, I think they need to. I think me, you, and Sean said it on the pod late last week that his sample size is so small. I think it's only 29 Premier League games, and you can. Yes, it was for Southampton, and obviously he started a lot of those games, but. If you can kind of compare the attitudes towards him and then, Stefan Bajcetic, who's played, half of those games, there's not a great deal in it. I think Bajcetic has played 17 or 18 for the first team. And obviously some of those have been Champions League appearances too. So it feels like because he's not at Liverpool, if he was at Liverpool and he played 29 games, I don't think anyone will be, looking to put him to the fore and say, he can solve our midfield problems. But I suppose it's because he's, as is the case with a lot of things in football, because Liverpool don't own him, fans want him, if that makes sense. It's the same kind of treatment that I think Curtis Jones has had because he isn't Liverpool. Because he is Liverpool, he's not as exciting. But I do like Lavia from what I have seen. I'm kind of in the same camp as you. I can't say I've seen a great deal of him, but obviously the kind of the reels and the highlights and the stats that you do look into it, he seems like a good player, progressive with the ball as well, can pass off both feet. I don't think he's as much of a driver as say a Declan Rice, who looks to get into the box is maybe like a number 8 and a number 6 almost. But he's certainly someone who, if you look at his kind of pedigree in terms of learning his trade at Anderlecht and then going to Manchester City, and there was a really good piece in The Athletic a few weeks ago that basically detailed his journey and kind of how high Guardiola thought of him. I think Company had him for his, I think while he was making his kind of later developments in Anderlecht, I think that was on the Company's watch, and I think there was a bit of communication there between Company and Guardiola as to how good this lad was. I mean, the fact that City have, inserted a buyback clause of 40 million, I think, tells you everything you need to know about what they thought. So yeah, I think he would be a good signing. I don't think he'd be enough on his own. And I don't think it'd be fair to throw a 19-year-old lad on his own, because, it's not as if Liverpool are working with a functioning midfield. That midfield that takes to Stamford Bridge on the opening day, whatever it is going to be a whole new combination, whether it be McAllister, Szoboszlai, Trent, McAllister, Szoboszlai, Fabinho. If you've got 3 new players in there, that's you're asking for, an instant reaction, which isn't always the case. I think I mentioned it a few weeks ago that when Fabinho came, it took him a couple of months to kind of settle in and kind of get into his groove at Liverpool. But if they are to, get him and, complement him with, I don't know, someone of like Kimmich's caliber, or even an Amrabat who's a bit further in his development, I think 25, 26, I think that would be a smart signing and one for long term. And ultimately, if Fabinho's move doesn't go through, I don't think that would be the absolute worst case, scenario. Yes, they would never get that £40 million on the table again. You'd think, I think he'd only have 2 years left on his deal come next summer. But if you could maybe do a changing of the guard with Fabinho and Lavia over the next 12 months, as they have done with, Gakpo and Firmino, and further back with Diaz and Mane, I don't think that would be kind of the worst apprenticeship for Lavia to have during his first 12 months as a Liverpool player. But, time will tell. As you say, Joe, Southampton are pretty stern, always in their valuations, aren't they? But if the fact that Liverpool put 37 million on the table, I'd be surprised if that was their absolute limit. It's it's a game of cat and mouse here, isn't it? So that's probably it probably feels like a fair offer, that, but Southampton will obviously be holding out for more as they look to rebuild under their new manager too. So we'll wait to see if there is a compromise in the days ahead.
I think, Tom, it might be one that we see Liverpool offer a lot of add-ons to get that towards the 50 million figure, and you think with a lad who's 19, 20 years of age, that the add-ons, realistic ones, would make sense. And B, Liverpool are also maybe testing the waters to see how far the player wants to push it, because obviously I think Lavia is clear that he doesn't want to play in the Championship. But Tom, it feels like one that if you sign Lavia and you have him alongside Fabinho learning his trade, like Keith has just said, it kind of would be the sort of perfect scenario for Liverpool. But there's a feeling, isn't there, at Liverpool, that Fabinho will still make this move to Saudi Arabia, despite a bit of a delay, if you like, on the deal that isn't to do with French Bulldogs.
Yeah, we've just had a piece go up before, on the situation. We understand that Liverpool do expect deals still to happen, despite, a breakdown in talks at the moment. There's a bit of an issue relating to that at the minute. 2 clubs still in discussions, and like you said, Liverpool expecting it still to happen. The fact that Fabinho's agent, George Mendes, has good links with Liverpool, that could be another factor as well. Al Ittihad manager Nuno, obviously formerly of Wolves, also shares the same agent. So there's a lot of factors in this deal that suggest it's likely to happen. There's likely to be an agreement found at some stage. And if there isn't, like you said, Liverpool just have to adapt to that. But I think it seems more likely at this point that he is going to leave Liverpool. And to be honest, I think that probably suit Liverpool more in the long run if they're able to get that money, which they can reinvest straight away. We don't often see Liverpool spending a load of money all at once if they haven't had sales at the same time as well. So if they are to reinvest, the money from Fabinho, that will ideally go on then on Lavia straight away, and potentially then, using a bit of the Henderson money on another player. So like you said, I think it's likely still to go through at this point, and you'd probably accept it if you're Liverpool, to be honest.
Well, Liverpool clearly, I think, want the deal to go through, I guess, because they must be realistic in knowing that they're not going to get anywhere near 40 million, Tom, for a player who is 29, and they probably know it's an offer they won't get again, don't they?
Yeah, like Keifer said, it's probably something that's not going to come up again further down the line, the same value anyway. So, if you're Liverpool, you're going to cash in on that when you get it this summer. So you can understand why, that's an offer they're, attracted to and want to accept. So it comes down to, negotiations between the player and the other club and whether that happens or not. But I think from Liverpool's point of view, it makes sense to sell him.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the midfield that did play against Greuther Furth, Keifer, Trent back in the 6 role, and then you had McAllister, and then they tried Cody Gakpo there for a second time. I mean, we'll start, I suppose, with Trent. It's now looking more and more likely, isn't it, that he will play there at Chelsea. What have you made of him in those two games? Well, I wouldn't even say it's not a full game, is it? It's 90 minutes, 190 minutes over the 2 games so far. Are you confident going into Chelsea that he's the right man in that role?
It's so difficult to assess. I think pre-season as a whole is, but never mind the kind of level of opposition Liverpool have come up against so far, and 2 Bundesliga sides. I know they've both been further ahead in their preparations, so they obviously haven't made as many changes as Liverpool, and certainly haven't blooded as many youngsters as Liverpool have. But it's so difficult because when Liverpool do play these teams, they dominate the ball, and I think we all know what Trent can do with the ball. That's been his biggest strength for the past 5-6 years in the Liverpool first team. I think it's more positionally and out of possession that you're certainly looking at Trent and trying to maybe learn some lessons there. I don't think we necessarily got that yesterday, and especially the goals Liverpool conceded. Obviously, he was off the pitch for all of them, wasn't he? But even the other day against Karlsruhe, the 2 goals were absolute screamers, weren't they? I don't think there was much that could have been done there. So it wasn't like you're picking flaws in his game or his position. I wrote something earlier this week about that, and there was quite a lot of people saying, "Oh God, I'd have Trent nowhere near the 6 at Chelsea." But I think the reality of it is that Liverpool are running out of time, and there's 2.5 weeks until Chelsea. Obviously, they fly out to Singapore on Thursday. They play Bayern Munich on Saturday, and then Leicester, I think, the following Tuesday. So they've got the game at Preston, haven't they? The week after that. So they've got 3 games left. And I think Klopp said yesterday, didn't he, that it was going to be the last game where Liverpool would do 2-11. It would, so you'd imagine it would be 60, 70, and then 90 maybe against Leicester or in that game at Preston. And the chances are, yes, they've had this opening bid for Lavia, literally just rejected now. But the chances of him being involved in Singapore in any capacity, even if Liverpool were to agree a deal later this week, is pretty slim, you'd say. So then all of a sudden you're looking at a friendly against Darmstadt, a week on Monday, 6 days before you go to Stamford Bridge as potentially your first outing with Lavia as a best case scenario. And I just think it's such a tight turnaround. And I always think back to when Thiago signed and they played Chelsea. I know that was the 2nd or 3rd game of the season, and he wasn't even dropped in. He came on at half time, but I think that was only because Chelsea were down to 10 men, and the game kind of lent itself to kind of his introduction and to maybe break the lines a bit more. So as much as people won't see it as a long-term option, and certainly a viable one going ahead if Liverpool are to kind of compete on all fronts, I think it is literally a case of you're looking at it now that they are running out of options. Bajcetic and Thiago still haven't returned to team training, which, hopefully that can happen in the coming days, and certainly they can get some minutes under their belts in Singapore. But I'm looking at it now and thinking I don't see how else it plays out, because it gets to that point where you're checking names off a list and you think, well, Trent's played 2 games there. He's played with Alexis. He's played with Dominic Szoboszlai. He's played with whoever else in midfield, whether that be Gakpo. He surely is the most suited. He knows the kind of, if they are going to do this inverted role, he knows the requirements of the other players are grounded off the cover. I just think it makes sense, and I'm not saying that as if Trent's going to be Liverpool's long-serving number 6, but I just think as kind of a process of elimination of who it isn't going to be, I think it will probably end up with Trent starting there.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, Cody Gakpo is another player who plays midfield. I mean, I can't praise Cody Gakpo highly enough. I mean, I just think he's an incredible footballer so far at Liverpool. I've been just blown away by how well he's sort of replicated that Firmino role. And I must admit, this is a guy who came in his first few games. I couldn't quite tell what he was, and maybe that's weird because Firmino was very similar, wasn't he, albeit under a different manager. But then dropping into midfield, and again, as Keifer's just mentioned, the sample size isn't just very small; it's also against opposition, which is, in inverted commas, weak. Plus, it's in pre-season, so it's difficult to tell. But I mean, just some of his touches on the ball, the way he uses it, the way he sort of turns and gets Liverpool on the front foot. He's such a clever player. Would you have any qualms about putting him in there, especially if you're going into Chelsea with a fairly new midfield, or would you be more minded to throw in more natural, or again in inverted commas, natural players in midfield?
No, I'd be more than happy for Gakpo to play, to be honest. I think, like you said, he was really impressive last season at Liverpool, and there was a lot of questions about him. Like you said, when he came in, he struggled to get that goal for the first few games, and people were kind of looking at him thinking, where are the goals going to come from? He looks quite low on confidence. First few games, the touch wasn't quite there. The few shots he did have were either off target or just straight at the keeper, I seem to remember. But yeah, since then, towards the end of last season, he really adapted to the role, looked great in the team, and I think he should be starting next season for Liverpool as one of the players in the starting 11 for most games. You've obviously got the problem now of who plays where, and does he play up front or on the wing or in midfield? And that's something Klopp's going to have to figure out. But I'd be happy for him to play in midfield. I think he'd be able to do just fine there. Obviously, he'd probably prefer himself to be further up the pitch, just in terms of scoring goals and linking up with the forwards, which he showed he was able to do. But I think if you're someone like Gakpo, you probably for your own sake, if you want to play games, would just accept that this might be his best way into the team. Some players often have to adapt to a different position just to get first team minutes. So maybe that's something he's going to have to do this season. Then further down the line, there may be the chance to go as part of the front three. But I think he would be a good addition in the midfield.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think with Liverpool and Klopp, he likes players, doesn't he, that play, that are adaptable, that can play into different positions, and Gakpo clearly is one of those. He can play across the front line, and the way he's dropped into midfield is really impressive. I suppose the only worry going into Chelsea is how attacking that midfield could be. But I think ultimately, maybe this isn't quite the right phrase, but beggars can't be choosers, and if Liverpool don't have a lot to choose from at Chelsea, maybe you just have to go on the front foot, maybe try and catch them early under a new manager, perhaps not settled, try and outscore them a little bit more. So it's going to be interesting. I think I was really impressed with Gakpo anyway yesterday. It was only a small sample size. Before we discuss maybe the second half, I wouldn't say worries. I don't want to say worries, but second half mistakes. Do you both think that there's a bit too much put on friendlies? I know social media isn't probably the best place to follow a game, but I had the game on one screen yesterday and Twitter on the other, and you see people going, that's 6 goals conceded in 2 games and 6 goals against lower league German opposition, and nothing's changed. Liverpool's back line, this, that, and the other, and you're sitting there thinking, like, Liverpool played with 3 goalkeepers yesterday at different times. I think they had 25 players on the pitch, all told. They made loads and loads of changes. They played with people that probably won't get very near the first team this season. I mean, it's all about fitness at this stage of the season, and it's all right. I do think that you've got to put some emphasis on friendlies, because I think if you go into the season having lost every friendly match or making big mistakes, I think you can carry that in, and I think you're better off carrying momentum into the season. But at the same time, a few good touches for players, some good goals, and fitness is more important, isn't it, Keifer, surely, than worrying about every goal conceded. What do you think? Do you think just in the social media age, people get a bit excited about pre-season?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends how you look at it, doesn't it? Is your glass half full or half empty? And I think with Twitter, I could probably tell you the answer to that. But I think it'll be the friendlies, this next batch of friendlies in kind of Singapore, where maybe you are a bit more critical. As I say, there'll be less rotation. I think, it was 15 subs they had on yesterday, wasn't it? Which is an absurd amount, but it just goes to show what the kind of primary aim was yesterday, was to kind of continue to get minutes into the legs. And, for the likes of Jones and Elliott, who maybe hadn't been part of the camp for large parts, it was to kind of get their first minutes of the new season. I think also another caveat to that is, they have been doing 3 sessions a day. So, the effect of that is your performance is going to be nowhere as good, and a lot of players are going to be tired, and you might pick up slight injuries here and there with Szoboszlai, etc. So I kind of split it in, and I look at the kind of the training camp in Germany. I think that's where Klopp goes hard, lays the foundation, and does the kind of the base work, and then it will be these kind of games against Bayern Munich and Leicester, more respectable opposition, where we might maybe see Liverpool maybe flex them up a bit more kind of thing, I think. I remember last year, City, I think they only played they never play a lot of friendlies on the Pep, it feels like, but I think they lost to Barcelona and a few other sides, and people saying, oh, and then they go on and win the treble. So it just kind of shows, what the manager said yesterday after the game was that the camp had been brilliant and not much more could have, gone for them. It was in an area that and obviously he'd been there with Dortmund before. And I think he likes to kind of get away from the media, doesn't he? And just kind of have his own time with the players. And as I say, kind of 3 sessions a day. So, certainly Klopp's not complaining or putting any excuses up like maybe was the case last year when they went straight to Asia. So I think, as I say, the next kind of 10 days of Liverpool summer, if you want to call it that, will be a bit more telling and a bit more revealing as we see lengthier spells in the team, 60, 70-minute cameos and maybe more of the shape taking place and patterns and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I suppose Darwin Núñez, to me, Tom sums it all up because, you look at last season, there was the game against United where he was getting slagged off left, right and centre and people were writing him off after one game and opposition fans were having a good laugh at his expense. And then was it against Palace, he scored 4 goals and suddenly he was the best thing that was ever going to hit the Premier League. And the truth lay somewhere in between. We saw the good and the bad and the ugly of him last season, didn't we? But he forged a pretty good partnership with Mo Salah yesterday. Obviously, they've both scored now in the first couple of games. He scored in a couple of them and just looks sharp, looked good playing through the middle. And those two linked up really well. Is that a partnership that could really factor into success for Liverpool this season?
Hopefully, yeah. Just going back to the point about pre-season as well, though, I think you're talking about expectations of pre-season. I think, when Liverpool lost, was it the Bangkok Century Cup to United last year?
That still hurts.
After the 4-0 loss to Man United, and then United, all United fans said they're back, this is it. And then they lost 2-1 to Brighton and 4-0 to Brentford in the first 2 games. So I don't think you can ever really read too much into friendly games, even though, you always want to win them, but I don't think they don't give you much of an idea of what's to come, really. So I think people will just get a bit carried away in terms of what it means going forward. I don't think the players probably take it that seriously themselves in terms of, you can't replicate an actual match in terms of preparing for a pre-season game. So, yeah, I think it's nothing to worry about. And going back to Núñez, I think, Liverpool fans will be hoping to see a bit more from him this season. We saw glimpses of what he could do last year, but it just didn't quite happen over a prolonged period where he was consistent, and a real threat at all times. We saw, periods where he wasn't in the team, Klopp opting for different players over him, which was, seemed a bit strange considering the price they paid for him. This season, it's going to be not make or break, but he needs to kind of establish himself fully in the team. Otherwise, then questions probably will be asked of him long term in terms of what, where does he fit in at Liverpool and was it the right decision to sign him? I think it's still too early to be asking those questions of him yet, but if he was to have another season where he doesn't quite, 20 goals, 25 goals, that would be a good sort of point to get to. If he's not able to do that, then I think people are probably within the rights to start sort of asking, well, why did Liverpool sign him? And there's always going to be that comparison with Haaland. We had that last year and he's not going to be able to get to that level. But if he can get somewhere close to that, then I'm sure Klopp will be happy.
Yeah, I think the indicator for Núñez is whether he can even get in the side. And that might sound drastic, might it? But we've talked about the 4-5 forwards Liverpool have got, and they're so talented that when everyone's fit, just getting in the side for him will be a fight. And I do wonder whether Klopp fully trusts him to do the things going the other way that perhaps Gakpo does. That Salah, Salah will get in the team, whatever, won't he? And then Diaz on the other side perhaps offers you a bit more balance. So I think it'd be really interesting, and whether we go into the season seeing Salah and Núñez as the right attacker and the central attacker, I think will be a big indicator of what Klopp's seen in pre-season. Because if those two can link up the way they have done in the first couple of games, pretty much scary for opposition defences, but scary for Liverpool perhaps is the performance of Adrian Keifer. I mean, you know what? I'll lift the curtain a little bit for listeners. He caused a bit of a debate among writers in our group yesterday when we were watching the game, and I'm happy to say where I stand on it. I won't name other names, but I certainly look at Adrian and look at realistic enough to know that ultimately it's not make or break Liverpool whether they keep Adrian or let him go. But I did find it quite interesting this year that they let him. Well, they gave him a new contract. Obviously, there's the homegrown thing. A lot of other clubs seem to go for, United have got Tom Heaton, City have got Scott Carson. They go for the homegrown third choice goalkeeper, a more experienced option who is kind of happy to be a part of things, which Adrian is, but he's not homegrown. But watching him throw the ball out to was it James McConnell yesterday that he threw the ball out to? Put the young lad under a lot of pressure, and they obviously conceded a really stupid goal. I mean, I'll go back to the Atletico game a few years back. Maybe I haven't forgiven Adrian for that game, but it's one of them, isn't it? He must be Keifer. He must be the absolute best person behind the scenes because, and we know Klopp likes personalities, but it does boggle my mind. I won't lie.
Yeah, probably in the same camp as you there, Joe. That Atletico Madrid game keeps me up certain nights of the week. I must say, even 3.5 years on. But I think there has been such an upheaval in terms of personnel at Liverpool this summer. James Milner's gone, Oxlade-Chamberlain's gone, Firmino's gone. And not to keep banging that drum, but you got to factor that in. And with Fabinho and Henderson, two kind of vital cogs, also looking like they're edging towards the exit. I think you can kind of maybe join the dots up and see why Klopp has come to that decision. It's maybe at a time where Liverpool have got young goalkeepers coming through. They've also got Pitaluga who played the kind of last quarter of the second half, and then you've also got Harvey Davis who's quite well liked, and he's just gone to Crewe, hasn't he, on a season long loan. So I think there's maybe a fact here that Liverpool see a guy who they brought in a few years ago after Mignolet gone, and they like what they've done. He doesn't rock the boat at all. He's a leader, Spanish speaking. They have a strong Spanish contingent there. As you say, Joe, he must be doing some God's work behind the scenes, which that's the kind of only way we can judge it because he doesn't play. I think he only played the Community Shield last year, didn't he? That was the only game he played all season. So, certainly not much to kind of judge his performances off. But in the years ahead, as you say, Harvey Davis, looking for a crack. It depends what happens with Keller as well. If he goes, all of a sudden Liverpool then do need to go out into the market and buy another goalkeeper or potentially, promote one in-house that isn't Adrian. As I say, they've got Pitaluga too. So it does maybe feel like they are looking at a stopgap solution for the meantime. And then, I presume that contract was a year extension and then maybe they'll assess it next year in terms of how the other young lads have kind of fared in their development and how they've got on. But certainly I wouldn't be reading too much into it. And, if Liverpool do get to a stage in the season where, Adrian is starting Premier League games, then I think an awful lot has gone wrong and maybe something that Liverpool can't have necessarily planned for. So as much as yesterday was frustrating, I don't really buy too much into it.
Yeah, Tom, finishing off with a discussion around another player who's perhaps I don't want to, you don't want to make a big deal of a friendly because it is just a friendly, and they had a very changed Liverpool team around them. But Joel Matip didn't put in the best of performances, did look quite rusty, did look slightly, I don't know, undercooked maybe going into the new season. Do you think centre back and with all the talk about midfield, Henderson, Fabinho, now Lavia, all that chat and all that focus has taken Liverpool away from centre back a bit. Obviously, we know that Colwill was a target, but you wouldn't be surprised if they don't end up getting anyone in defence this year now. Maybe because they concentrate on other areas. But do you think that would be a mistake? Because you've got someone like Matip, who's third choice, who is starting to go on the wane a little bit. And I don't mean that based on one friendly, but I think in general, you're seeing him start to age a little bit, and perhaps you would want someone younger coming in and challenging for his place. Do you think that could be a mistake that Liverpool are about to make going into the season?
I guess we'll find out in a few months if Matip plays and doesn't.
Get off the fence.
I quite like Matip. I think he's a solid player. I think he's fine. I think next season, if you go in with him as an option, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I think usually when he's played for Liverpool, he's done a good job, and can't really think of many games really with him where he's had a bad game or, a moment that really stands out as, terrible error in a big moment. Like you said with Adrian, you can think of 2 or 3. With Matip, I can't really think of many at all that he's, been at fault for. Or
I don't think, sorry to interrupt, I don't think Matip's the type of player that you can think of many big mistakes, but I can think of him being part of some bad performances. Quite often I feel like he's not one that you see him drop a clanger, but he's one that you see him sort of retreat into himself a little bit as Liverpool play badly. I think that's fair.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. But I think one of his best seasons wasn't even not that long ago, the 21-22 season. That was probably his best season for Liverpool, mainly because he was able to stay fit. My only problem with him is the fitness aspect. I think that's just the only sort of bad thing with Matip is the availability and not being able to use him for much of the season. I think that's the only downside to him, which could make you want to go and sign a new player just because you don't know if you're going to be able to rely on him, a bit like Keita in midfield. So if Klopp clearly likes him, he's probably going to leave anyway at the end of next season. So, if he was playing for Liverpool next year as a third option, I don't think it would be the end of the world. Liverpool probably still need to buy a centre-back, but that could maybe come at the end of next season. But we could be in this position where we're looking back on it, a bit like the midfield, where you're looking at it at the end of the season thinking, yeah, we should have signed players. I think with the midfield, it was a bit more obvious, but defence, like you said, is now becoming an area that people are talking a bit more about.
But isn't that the problem, Keifer, is that almost because they haven't sorted the midfield out for a couple of years, that the problems bottleneck a little bit, and you can't get ahead. Rather than wanting to be proactive in the transfer market, you end up being reactive and not, like Tom says. I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool go into the season and before you know it, Matip's injured, Konate's injured, and they're in a situation where they haven't got the centre backs. And I'm not being doom and gloom there. I just think that those players do pick up injuries, and it would have been good to see Liverpool get ahead themselves and bring in a younger centre half who can sort of progress and learn this season.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. They need to be proactive instead of reactive. And I hate to always bring up Man City, but they feel like the benchmark, and they're who Liverpool are going to come up against if they are to be successful again next year. And you even look at it now with Kyle Walker and looking like he's going to move on to Bayern Munich. Still probably got a little bit left in the tank, but City have definitely had his best days. Going to recoup a fee on him and probably bring in someone 10 years younger than him, ready to kind of step up in 12, 18 months time. And you just kind of flip that on its head and look at Liverpool, and Matip will go on a free, and they've not recouped anything there. I know he came on a free initially, but what I'm trying to say, they've not boosted the kitty, and then they're kind of next summer they're looking at a centre back who would actually probably need to come in, and be a first choice, because you look at where Van Dijk will probably be, getting a year older, and certainly he's edging towards 34, whatever it'll be next summer. So yeah, it is from that position. It's a bit annoying, and it is very similar to the midfield in terms of, I think we said 2 years ago, or certainly when Wijnaldum left in 2021, that they needed to go and get someone, and they didn't. Maybe they thought because they brought Thiago in the year before and they hadn't lost Wijnaldum, that it maybe balanced itself out. But the matter of fact, it wasn't, and it probably did hold Liverpool back last season. I think now, though, the annoying thing is that I felt with the kind of early moves this summer in the transfer window with McAllister and Szoboszlai that they almost rectified that, and it was a really strong start. They got them both through the door before pre-season, and it almost felt like Liverpool had got the necessities, and now they could maybe sprinkle some something on top of the cake and put the cherry on and start looking at a bit of, not luxury players, but start adding the fine print to the squad and players who would make a difference but weren't necessarily like necessities like the midfielders were. But now with Fabinho and Henderson going or looking likely to go, it feels like the rug's kind of been pulled from under their feet a little bit, and it's back to being reactive again. And they are going to have to address that, and then the centre back issues get pushed back another 6 to 12 months, and then you probably find yourself in the same predicament next year, where yes, you're sorting your centre halves, but then there might be other areas of the squad, whether it be a goalkeeper or other areas you mentioned, where you've got to sort that out. So it does feel like Liverpool just haven't been able to get a stride or two in front of themselves this summer, which is really annoying, because as I say, when they got the two lads through the door so early, I was really thinking, well, they brought in one defender and one young defensive midfielder like a Lavia. It would have been a really, probably would have said it's an 8, 9 out of 10 window, a really big one, a statement window. But now, all of a sudden, with, as I said, 2.5 weeks out to Stamford Bridge, and they haven't got a defensive midfielder and they haven't got a centre back, and it kind of undoes the work they've done earlier in the window. So fingers crossed they can rectify that in the coming weeks. But as I say, I think you hit the nail on the head, Joe, at the top by saying they need to be proactive as opposed to reactive.
Yeah, Keifer, agreed. Thanks very much, lads. We will be back on Friday to preview the trip to Singapore, the match against Bayern Munich, which should be a good one, and probably to talk Romeo Lavia, see if there's any developments on that in the next few days. And the same goes for Fabinho and Jordan Henderson, who still hasn't completed his move to Saudi Arabia. We expect that to happen in the coming weeks. So be very interesting. We'll see you again on Friday. Ta-ra.
You've been listening to the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.